Lee Marvin's fist was meant to pull back just 3 inches shy of John Wayne's face. Instead, a sudden slip sent it crashing directly into the icon's jaw with a crack so violent that every actor inside the saloon forgot the scene. Real blood splashed across the sawdust. A whiskey glass slipped from a stunned extra's fingers. And somewhere behind the camera, a woman whispered, "Oh God!" But the director did not shout cut. The cameraman did not lower his lens. And John Wayne, his mouth filling with blood, did not fall. He slowly turned his face back toward Lee Marvin and stared into the younger actor's terrified eyes. Then he said 2 words, "Keep going." What John did during the next 8 seconds would become a secret Hollywood legend. It would save Lee Marvin's career, produce the most authentic scene in the entire picture, and begin a fierce battle with a director who nearly destroyed the footage to ensure that nobody ever saw it. But to understand why that punch mattered, you have to return to the dusty Western set where everything went wrong. It was the summer of 1957 on the outskirts of Burbank, California. The afternoon sun burned above an aging frontier town constructed from timber, plaster, and Hollywood illusion. Behind the swinging doors of the main saloon, dozens of crew members hurried between cameras, cables, and lighting stands. The production was already 3 days behind schedule. Money was disappearing. Patience was running out. And at sunrise the following morning, studio executive Samuel Hart would arrive to decide whether the Western deserved more funding or whether the entire production would be shut down. Director Clayton Mercer had only one chance to impress him. The scene scheduled that afternoon appeared simple on paper. Lee Marvin would enter the saloon, confront John Wayne over a stolen land deed, and throw a right hook that missed Duke's jaw by exactly 3 inches. John would snap his head backward. The sound department would add the impact later. Then the 2 men would destroy half the saloon in a carefully choreographed brawl. They had rehearsed every movement, every punch, every fall, every broken bottle. By late afternoon, they had filmed the sequence 6 times. Nothing had gone wrong, but nothing felt alive either. Lee's punches looked calculated. John's reactions came a fraction too early. The extras scattered on cue, yet every movement seemed mechanical. Clayton watched the 6th take from behind the camera and rubbed his exhausted eyes. "Again," he ordered. "This time, I want to believe you hate each other." Crew members quietly returned the furniture to its marks. A breakaway table was rebuilt. Fresh bottles made from sugar glass were placed along the bar. John Wayne stood beneath the hot studio lights wearing a dust-covered coat and a gun belt that pulled heavily against his hip. He rolled his shoulders once, lifted a glass of colored water, pretending it was whiskey, and looked toward Lee. "Ready?" Lee nodded. He had already built a reputation as one of Hollywood's toughest emerging actors. But standing opposite John Wayne still made him feel as though he were being examined by a living monument. "Try not to think about the punch," John told him. "Think about why your character throws it." Clayton raised his hand. The set fell silent. Camera rolling. Take 7. The wooden doors burst open. Lee entered with fury burning across his face, his spurs scraping against the floorboards. He delivered his lines about betrayal, stolen property, and a family driven from its land. John remained beside the bar, apparently unconcerned. "You finished talking?" he asked. Lee stepped closer. "I haven't even started." That was the signal. Lee planted his left boot and drove his right fist forward exactly as rehearsed, but the heel of his boot caught the raised edge of a loose floorboard. His balance shifted. His body lunged farther than expected, and the carefully measured 3-inch gap vanished. The fist connected directly with John Wayne's jaw. The sound was sickening. Duke's head snapped sideways. Blood sprayed from his lower lip and struck the floor beneath the bar. For a fraction of a second, the famous actor's eyes lost focus. Lee froze with his arms still extended. The script supervisor dropped her clipboard. One extra stepped forward, expecting the director to stop everything, but the cameraman continued filming. Through the surge of pain, John understood what everyone else had forgotten. The scene was still alive. He spat blood into the sawdust, turned toward Lee, and quietly commanded, "Keep going." Lee's face changed. Fear remained in his eyes, but pure instinct took control of his body. John swung the next choreographed punch. Lee ducked, drove his shoulder into Duke's chest, and allowed himself to be thrown across the breakaway card table. Wood exploded beneath him. Men shouted and chairs overturned as the extras recovered and rejoined the chaos. John seized Lee by the collar and slammed him against the bar. You wanted justice, he growled, real blood running down his chin. Now you've been paid in full. He released him, crossed toward the saloon doors, and stopped on his final mark. For several unbearable seconds, nobody breathed. Then Clayton shouted, "Cut." Before we enter that trailer and reveal the decision that almost ended Lee Marvin's career, let me ask you something. If you had been standing on that set, would you have stopped the scene or continued like John Wayne? Tell us in the comments and let us know what country or city you're watching from today. If stories about courage, loyalty, and the hidden side of Hollywood mean something to you, please like this video, share it with someone who loves classic cinema, and subscribe. Because what happened next was far more powerful than the punch itself. The instant filming stopped, Lee's strength abandoned him. He gripped the edge of the bar as his hands began to shake. The prop bottles rattled beneath his fingers. "John," he whispered. John did not answer right away. He touched his lip, looked at the blood on his glove, and moved his jaw carefully from side to side. One of his back teeth felt loose. Pain pulsed beneath his ear, and the left side of his face was already beginning to swell. The assistant director rushed toward him with a medical kit. John walked straight past him. Not angrily, not hurriedly, but heading toward his trailer with the unmistakable stride that warned everyone not to stand in his path. Lee remained inside the ruined saloon, staring at the blood in the sawdust. He hadn't struck an unknown stuntman. He had just punched John Wayne, the biggest Western star in America, in front of an entire crew. An accident didn't matter when powerful men wanted someone to blame. One complaint from John could remove Lee from the film before sunset. One call to the studio could follow him for years. Director Clayton Mercer rushed after John. At the doorway, he glanced back at Lee. "You'd better come with us." The walk across the set felt like a march toward an execution. When Lee entered the trailer, John stood before a narrow mirror, washing blood from his mouth. He spat into the basin, tested his loose tooth with his tongue, and examined the swelling along his jaw. Clayton closed the door. For several seconds, the only sound was water dripping from the faucet. Lee swallowed hard. "Duke, I'm sorry. My boot caught the floor. I lost my balance." "I swear I didn't." John turned around. "Do you pull your punches?" Lee blinked, confused. "No, sir, but I control where they land." "Not today," John countered. "No, sir," Lee admitted. John studied him in silence. Lee prepared himself for anger, humiliation, perhaps even dismissal. Instead, John nodded once. "I saw the floorboard catch you. It was an accident." Relief nearly broke Lee's knees, but Clayton stepped forward, his face pale with panic. "Accident or not, that footage can never be used." John slowly looked at him. Clayton continued, "You're bleeding on camera. The studio's lawyers will investigate. Insurance will shut us down, and when Samuel Hart sees what happened, Lee could be finished." John wiped the blood from his chin. "That was the best take we got all day. It was real because he actually hit you." "Exactly." Clayton stared at him in disbelief. Outside the trailer, the crew waited in nervous silence. Inside, 3 men stood around a piece of film that could save the picture or destroy all of them. Then Clayton revealed the decision he had already made. "We destroy take 7 tonight." John Wayne's expression hardened. He dropped the blood-stained towel onto the table and stepped toward the director. "No," he said quietly. "You won't." Director Clayton Mercer stared at John Wayne as if the blow to the jaw had damaged more than a tooth. "You don't understand what's at stake," Clayton insisted. "If Samuel Hart sees that footage and realizes Lee struck you for real, he won't ask whether it was an accident. He'll ask who failed to protect the studio." John stepped closer. "And your answer will be the truth. The truth could close this production." "No, fear could close it." Clayton glanced toward Lee Marvin, who remained near the trailer door with his arms hanging rigidly by his sides. Lee had entered expecting John to demand his dismissal. Instead, the wounded superstar was risking his own standing to protect both the scene and the man who had accidentally injured him. Clayton lowered his voice. "This isn't about artistic courage. Samuel arrives at dawn. We're 3 days behind schedule. The budget is nearly gone, and our biggest star has a swollen jaw. If he believes this set is unsafe, he'll pull the money before breakfast." "Then we show him the finished take with blood running from my mouth," John argued. "We show him a scene he can sell." Clayton shook his head. "We reshoot tomorrow." "We. Consequences. That tells me more about you than the punch did." Lee stared at his hands. "I froze for half a second. It felt longer. Fear always does." John pressed the bottle against his jaw again. Next time, watch your footing. Lee finally managed a faint smile. Yes, sir. And ease up on the morning coffee. Your hands shake enough without it. A strained laugh escaped Lee's throat, breaking the crushing weight on his chest. Outside, Clayton ordered the damaged floorboard removed. The camera operator labeled the film canister in thick black pencil. Take 7 print. Yet while John believed the matter was settled, another man had witnessed everything from behind the lighting rig. Arthur Vance, the studio's production accountant, had spent the afternoon documenting delays and wasted expenses. He had seen the punch, the blood, and the private walk toward John's trailer. More importantly, he understood that a serious accident had gone unreported. Arthur didn't care about Lee Marvin's future or artistic brilliance. He cared about protecting himself before Samuel Hart arrived. While John and Lee spoke inside the trailer, Arthur entered the production office and placed a long-distance call to the studio. This is Vance, he whispered to the operator. There has been an incident involving Mr. Wayne. A pause followed. No, the director hasn't reported it. Arthur glanced through the window to ensure he was alone. Lee Marvin struck him. There was blood. They're trying to keep the footage. The voice on the other end asked one final question. Arthur's expression turned cold. Yes, he answered. I believe the production should be suspended immediately. Less than an hour later, a confidential telegram was sent to Samuel Hart's hotel. By nightfall, the studio executive knew everything, and he was no longer coming merely to review the film. He was coming to fire someone. Samuel Hart arrived before sunrise in a black Cadillac. The production yard was still wrapped in blue morning darkness when he stepped from the vehicle, wearing a charcoal suit, polished shoes, and the expression of a man who had already reached a verdict. Director Clayton Mercer hurried across the lot to greet him. Samuel, we weren't expecting you this early. That, Samuel replied, was the idea. 2 men followed him from the car. One carried a leather briefcase, and the other was Mr. Halpern, an attorney from the studio's legal department. The sight of him turned Clayton's stomach cold. Samuel didn't ask about the schedule or the weather. His eyes went directly to the unfinished saloon and the workers replacing a floorboard. Where is Wayne? In the screening room. And Marvin is getting into costume. Bring them both. Nobody starts work until I say so. Within minutes, the crew realized something was wrong. Lights remained dark, cameras stayed under covers, and actors whispered near the wardrobe trailers. Inside the small screening room, John Wayne was already seated in the front row, his lower lip swollen and makeup attempting to hide the deep bruise on his jaw. John looked at Halpern's briefcase, then at Samuel. You brought legal counsel to watch dailies? I brought him to investigate an unreported workplace accident. Clayton's face lost its color. John remained calm. Who called you? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. The door opened and Lee Marvin entered. Seeing the attorney, he immediately knew the agreement made in John's trailer had collapsed. Samuel pointed to an empty chair. Sit down, Mr. Marvin. Lee sat. Samuel stood before the screen like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Yesterday afternoon, Mr. Marvin abandoned the approved choreography and struck the studio's leading actor. Mr. Wayne suffered facial injuries. The director failed to report the incident, and production continued without medical authorization. That isn't what happened, Clayton interjected. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why I learned about it from an accountant. Arthur Vance stood near the back wall. Until that moment, nobody had noticed him. John slowly turned in his seat. Arthur tried to hold his gaze, but quickly looked down at his papers. Samuel continued. Insurers could suspend coverage. The union could demand an inquiry. If Mr. Wayne's injury worsens, the studio could lose months of work. My jaw is fine, John said. Are you a doctor? No, but it belongs to me. This is not one of your westerns, John. You do not get to settle a liability problem with a stare and a handshake. John rose from his seat. No, I settle it with facts. Lee's boot caught a loose board. His punch traveled farther than rehearsed. He did not abandon the choreography, and he did not attack me. Yet you were struck. Accidents happen, not accidents that remain hidden. Clayton stepped forward. I made the decision to continue. If someone must be held responsible, it's me. Samuel's eyes hardened. You authorized printing the footage? Yes. Then you have. Demonstrated exactly why the studio can no longer trust your judgment. Lee stood abruptly. Mr. Hart, Clayton and John had nothing to do with my mistake. John looked at him. Sit down, Lee. I won't let them lose this picture because of me. Samuel opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. You may not have a choice. Legal recommends removing you from the production immediately. Mr. Mercer will be suspended pending review. Filming will stop until the insurer examines the set. Silence descended over the room. 3 sentences had placed the entire film on the edge of destruction. Dozens of crew members would be sent home, sets built over weeks would stand empty, and supporting actors would take other jobs. Even if production eventually resumed, the picture might never recover. Lee looked at the dismissal paper. Where do I sign? John moved between him and the table. Nowhere. Samuel's patience snapped. You may be the star, John, but you do not own this studio. No, I own something more useful. And what is that? The truth on that reel. John gestured toward the projection booth. You came here because Arthur told you a frightened version of what happened. Now watch what the camera saw. Samuel shook his head. We are not turning an injury into entertainment. That injury is already part of the film. The only question is whether you are brave enough to look at it. Halpern whispered into Samuel's ear. The executive listened, glancing between John's bruised face and the metal film canister beside the projector. At last he sat. One screening, he said. Then the decision stands. The room darkened, and the projector rattled to life. The saloon appeared on screen in faded color. John stood beside the bar. Lee entered through the swinging doors. Their argument unfolded exactly as scripted. Then Lee's boot caught the floorboard. The punch landed. Samuel leaned forward. Blood struck the sawdust. Lee froze, and John's eyes briefly lost focus. Anyone watching closely could see that something real had happened. Then came the words, "Keep going." The fight erupted. Seen on screen, the accident didn't resemble failure. It transformed the entire scene. John's pain gave every movement weight. Lee's horror became rage, shame, and desperation inside the character. The extras reacted with genuine fear. The camera trembled slightly as the operator followed the chaotic action, creating an immediacy none of the earlier takes possessed. When John delivered the final line with blood running down his chin, nobody inside the screening room moved. The picture faded, the projector spinning quietly in the dark. Samuel finally spoke. Show me the previous take. Clayton signaled the projectionist. Take 6 appeared. Clean movements, a safe miss, the table breaking on cue. Every line was delivered correctly, yet the scene felt completely dead. Samuel watched another earlier take, then demanded to see take 7 again. This time he studied Lee instead of John. He saw the instant of terror, the command to continue, and the younger actor's decision to trust the man he had accidentally struck. When the lights returned, Samuel remained silent. John faced him. You wanted something that could save this picture. There it is. Samuel looked toward Arthur. You said Mr. Marvin lost control. He did. Arthur insisted. Mr. Wayne was bleeding. Did they finish the scene? Arthur hesitated. Yes. Did Mr. Marvin strike him again outside the choreography? No. Was anyone else injured? No. John stepped closer to Samuel's chair. You can fire Lee, suspend Clayton, shut us down, and let lawyers explain why millions of dollars disappeared. Or you can admit that 2 actors finished a difficult scene after an accident and gave you the best footage this production has captured. Samuel stared at the dismissal papers. For one hopeful moment, Lee believed John had reached him. Then Halpern placed a hand on the executive's shoulder. If the studio knowingly uses footage of an actual injury, we may be accepting liability. If the story reaches newspapers, they'll say we endangered John Wayne to rescue a failing picture. Samuel's uncertainty vanished. He gathered the papers. Take 7 will be destroyed. Mr. Marvin, after you are finished here, production will remain suspended until further notice. John's voice turned dangerously quiet. If Lee leaves, I leave. Samuel looked up sharply. You are under contract. My contract requires me to perform, not to help you punish an innocent man. You would abandon an entire crew for him? No, you're the one abandoning them. The room held its breath. Samuel stood. If you walk away, the studio will sue you for every dollar this film has lost. John unbuckled his gun belt and dropped it onto the table. Then you'd better hire another attorney. We're done here. As John reached the door, the projectionist called out from the booth. Mr. Wayne, wait. Everyone turned. The elderly projectionist emerged holding 2 identical film canisters. Samuel's expression changed. What is that? When Mr. Mercer ordered the take printed last night, I made a protection copy. Halpern rushed toward him. Give me both reels. But the projectionist stepped backward. One canister slipped from his hands, struck the floor, and rolled beneath the seats. In the confusion, Arthur Vance seized the other reel and bolted for the exit. John understood instantly. Arthur wasn't trying to protect the studio anymore. He was destroying the only evidence that could expose his lie. Before anyone could stop him, he vanished into the waking production yard. Arthur ran frantically across the lot, the canister pressed against his chest. Behind him, the screening room door burst open. "Stop him!" Clayton shouted. Crew members turned as Arthur dodged lighting stands and scenery. He wasn't athletic, but panic drove him fast. John Wayne followed at a measured stride, watching where the accountant was heading, toward the black Cadillac waiting beside the studio gate. Arthur reached the car and yanked at the rear door. It was locked. The driver had carried Samuel's luggage inside and taken the keys. Arthur spun around. John stood less than 20 feet away. "Give me the reel," John commanded. Arthur tightened his grip. "You don't understand. If that footage survives, they'll blame everyone who knew about the accident. No, they'll blame the man who lied about it. I was protecting the studio. You were protecting yourself." Samuel, Lee, Clayton, and Halpern emerged from the building, joined by dozens of crew members watching the showdown. Arthur looked at the executive. "Mr. Hart, tell him to stay back." Samuel did not answer. "Give me the film," John repeated. Arthur glanced at the canister. He knew take 7 proved the floorboard caused the slip and proved the incident was an accident. Without it, his telegram remained the official story. With it, his dishonesty was exposed. Panicking, Arthur raised the canister and hurled it toward a metal barrel where the night crew burned scrap paper. Lee lunged forward. The canister struck the barrel's rim, bounced away from the flames, and rolled across the dirt. Lee dived, catching it with both hands and curling his body around it just as Arthur reached him. For a wild instant, the two men scrambled on the ground. "Enough!" John roared. The command thundered across the yard. Arthur froze. Lee rose slowly, dust covering his clothes, holding the film safely against his chest. John walked up to the accountant. "You nearly destroyed a man's career to hide the fact that you frightened yourself." Arthur's face flushed. "I followed procedure." "No, procedure meant reporting what you actually saw. You changed the story because you wanted to look important when Samuel arrived." Arthur turned to Hart. "I warned you about a serious accident. That was my responsibility." Samuel regarded him coldly. "Did Mr. Marvin deliberately strike Mr. Wayne?" "No, but—" "That was not my question." Arthur hesitated. "No. Did you know the floorboard caused him to lose his balance? I saw his boot catch something. Yet your telegram said he abandoned the choreography." Arthur's silence was a full confession. Samuel extended his hand toward Lee. "The reel, please." Lee looked at John before surrendering it. Samuel examined the dented canister and handed it to the projectionist. "Return this to the booth." Halpern stepped closer. "The legal recommendation has not changed. Using the footage creates unnecessary exposure." Samuel looked toward the waiting crew, carpenters, camera assistants, costumers, drivers, and electricians standing together in the morning cold. The film wasn't just an investment to them. It was weeks of hard labor and wages their families depended on. Then his gaze moved to John's swollen jaw. "Yesterday," Samuel said, "I came here to decide whether this picture still had value. Last night, I received a report suggesting the production had lost control. This morning, I watched evidence proving that report was misleading." Arthur attempted to speak, but Samuel cut him off with a glance. "Mr. Vance, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Security will escort you from the property." Arthur stared at him. "You're firing me for protecting you? I'm dismissing you for confusing fear with truth." 2 guards stepped up, and John simply stepped aside, allowing Arthur to leave with whatever dignity he had left. Samuel turned to Clayton. "Production resumes this morning." A murmur of relief spread through the crew. Clayton exhaled fully for the first time that day. "And take 7? Samuel looked at Halpern. "Prepare whatever releases are necessary. Mr. Wayne will receive a complete medical examination. The damaged floorboard will be documented and safety procedures reviewed." Halpern frowned. "That does not answer the question." Samuel's eyes moved toward the screening room. "Take 7 stays in the picture." Cheering erupted across the yard. Crew members applauded. Someone near the saloon yelled out in triumph, and the entire production sprang back to life. Lee remained silent. Samuel pulled the dismissal papers from his briefcase, tore them in half, and handed the pieces to him. "You have John Wayne to thank for this." Lee shook his head. "I have the truth to thank." John's mouth lifted into a faint smile. "Good answer." Clayton ordered everyone back to work. Lights flickered on, cameras were uncovered, wardrobe assistants hurried about, and carpenters finished securing the floorboard that had nearly ended everything. Lee stayed beside John. "I don't know how to repay you. You show up prepared." "I mean it, John." "So do I." John began walking toward makeup, but Lee stopped him one last time. "You were ready to leave the picture for me." John turned around. "I was ready to leave because on a set, as in life, you don't abandon a man who stands his ground when things go wrong." With a firm nod, Duke walked into his trailer, leaving Lee Marvin standing tall, ready to finish the movie that built his legacy.